Child trafficking.
Having a child kidnapped appears to be a distant reality, something that is discussed, but never really affects normal people.
My child won't get taken.
I take care of my children.
I live in a good neighborhood with trustworthy people.
This is often the sentiment shared by many unwilling to consider that their child could be taken from them, forced into the labor or sex trade, sold off to the highest bidder, and abused in worse ways than any parent would ever want to imagine. While it may seem as though abduction and trafficking crimes may have more of a presence in poverty-stricken areas, more wealthy nations have also been known to have many instances of child trafficking violations. In fact, the United States and most European countries have some of the highest trafficking destination rates in the world, meaning that the vast majority of people purchased or moved between borders arrive in these regions. In addition, the United States sees, on average, 2,100 missing children reports each day, and while the majority of these turn out to be non-abduction related, a number of these children do end up being taken.
There are multiple ways criminals may look to do this. The blatant abduction method by a stranger, often portrayed in television and media dramatizations, is, in reality, one of the least common ways in which an abductor will seek to kidnap a child. Stealing a child away in this manner would risk an escape by the victim, detection by bystanders, and potential police response, and thus is usually only seen in remote villages in India and less developed countries within Africa. The majority of abductors actually locate and kidnap victims by building a certain level of trust with the child and/or their parents prior to the abduction. This method is often known as child grooming, and while it may occur in a face-to-face setting, it most often takes place online through social media or some communication platform. Abductors will sometimes create fake accounts on a website looking for young boys and girls to interact with. By misleading the children into believing the culprit is the same age as they are, the aggressor is able to build an intimate relationship where personal information can be gathered from the victim. The trust is continually built as the abductor listens to the child's hardships, gives life advice, and sends gifts until the child can be lured away from home and taken, establishing a certain level of dependence along the way. Intimidation and blackmail can also be used in certain cases. A photograph or video sent by a child could be used by the aggressor to leverage the child into meeting or more sexual activities.
The following clip is an example of how a groomer might try to lure a potential target in. John Leonardo, the Predator. John spends his time online searching for vulnerable children to befriend in hopes of attracting them to an eventual meeting in person. He has found his target, 9-year-old Yuki Miller. Yuki, having some difficulties at home, is eager to talk to anyone and does not suspect John of being anyone other than his profile says he is. Over the last few weeks, John has built a strong relationship with Yuki, pretending to be supportive of his target in order to gain trust. Seeing Yuki's obvious vulnerability and taking advantage of the opportunity, John prepares to make his offer to Yuki. Yuki sees John's offer and is hesitant at first. He doesn't know what to do. But quickly Yuki decides that he would like to meet John and accepts his invitation. This was a mistake. Hey, dinner's almost ready.
Oh, okay.
You doing alright?
Yeah, I am fine.
The internet has proven to be a huge platform in the abduction of children across the globe, but also serves another equally as sinister purposes: the sale, transportation, and exploitation of children that have been captured. "76% of trafficking occurs on the internet. It is often incredibly hard to trace child trafficking offenders, as the frequent use of online currency as compared to physical paper money makes transactions near impossible to detect. Although most of the targets for sale are forcibly taken, many times families in poorer regions will sell their children to alleviate some financial stressors. This causes several problems, as even if the child is found to have been trafficked, the home of the child can rarely be found, and even if it can, he or she cannot be returned. The purposes for the sale of these individuals can vary, with most people trafficked for labor purposes or sexual exploitation, but in especially severe cases, women and girls are forcibly held strictly to make more children. that can be sold and distributed. Websites also exist to act as virtual brothels, putting women up for sale to the highest bidder. Many sites, usually disguised as dating sites, will have sections devoted to buying the services of trafficked girls and women. While these web pages do not always explicitly advertise the girls as being underage, the owners rarely ensure that the girls are over 18. It can also be very hard to trace the origin of these websites as well, as many operate on the deep web, which makes tracing the IP of the owner impossible. Other cases see those trafficked ended up in forced marriages, though this is more common in Asia, and used to commit petty crimes such as theft and drug sale. Victims are often kept loyal through threats and abuse, and these harsh conditions have led to an average 7-year life expectancy after the original trafficking of the victim.
Victims of trafficking are rarely treated well or with respect. Constant beatings and intense abuse are employed frequently to crush the will of the child and to discourage them from leaving with the threat of even worse punishment. Perpetrators may also look to methods such as rape, torture, and the murder of others who have been captured to ensure that everyone stays compliant. Many instances have also seen traffickers addicting children to drugs, creating dependence from them, and making any hopes of fleeing completely unrealistic. Aside from the terrible quality of life, the constant exploitation and abuse, death is a common occurrence among those taken. Those used for prostitution or pornographic purposes often contract numerous STDs and injuries from rape and can quickly die from these conditions. Others in forced labor environments are susceptible to malnutrition and being overworked, while both groups are at high risk of suicide and overdose. Even if the victims are eventually recovered and treated, deep psychological wounds typically remain, causing depression, anxiety, PTSD, sleeping and eating disorders, and even a perceived emotional attachment to the abductor.
Only about 24% of kidnappings are committed by a complete stranger, with 43% of the abductors being a close relative and 27% being an acquaintance of the victim. This illustrates that as much as trafficking occurs from a stranger pretending to be someone else, it occurs even more often within a victim's own family or by a neighbor. Even in cases with strangers, it is estimated that over 80% of the kidnappings occur within a quarter mile of the child's home. It would be hard for any individual child to avoid being trafficked in any case, as aside from being young and naive, abduction and trafficking could occur anywhere. Instead of having the responsibility fall on the victims and their parents, the government of affected nations should take action by implementing strict anti-trafficking laws and regulations that carry heavy sentences.
Many countries have made a focused effort to enact certain laws that aim to reduce the number of child trafficking and child abduction cases each year. For example, several countries in South Asia and Africa that have been crippled by child trafficking exports have made a point to suggest new legislation aimed at reducing the number of cases per year. However, these regulations have just not been enough. The laws India has in place, for example, are incredibly basic and disorganized, effectively only setting the expectation that children should not be stolen from their homes and sold away. India's government is attempting to repair this through the creation of the new Trafficking of Persons Bill 2016 that has not been finalized. It is the first piece of legislation that truly covers trafficking in a larger sense in the country, but until it is passed, India will likely continue to face many of the same issues that have plagued it for the last couple years. Similar situations are faced in countries such as Nigeria and the Philippines, though new legislature continues to slowly make its way into the legal system. The United States should not be exempt from the change coming either. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, it is generally accepted that using minors under 14 for prostitution purposes warrants 15 years to life in prison, while minors 14 to 17 warrant 10 years to life depending on the amount of force used during the crime. Minimum sentences should be increased to at least 30 years for all cases, and the exact age of the minor should not be a determining factor in sentencing as long as that victim is under 18. If the consequences for violating child trafficking laws were increased to match those of homicide or severe drug charges, many could be dissuaded to commit the crime in the first place. While this would certainly not solve the problem entirely, The implementation of new guidelines would help to avoid victimizing the boys and girls in the sex exploitation industry while punishing the real offenders like the pimps and the forced labor managers. This, coupled with better educational practices that help identify trafficked children in the countries most affected by trafficking, could limit the numbers, at least to a certain extent. While there may never be a definite solution to stop trafficking or abduction as a whole, and while the law will never stop some people from acting the way they do, these measures could at least be a step in the right direction towards making the world a better place.